Tonight, the red wave.
I think that we're going to continue to have some good victories all across the country.
Hits a blue wall.
I never expected that we were going to turn these red counties blue.
The midterms return a mixed bag. Even with House and Senate races across the country still too close to call.
We always knew that this race would be close.
If you can hang in there a little bit longer.
Plus the Trump effect.
Well, I think if they win, I should get all the credit, and if they lose, I should not be blamed at all.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. And not quite a red wave, but the ripple effects of election 2022 still ready to flip power in Congress. Good evening in Washington, D.C. I'm Jenna Browder. Tonight, the red wave, trumpeted by Republicans, looks more like a red trickle. And while Republicans could still take control of the House and likely will, it likely won't be by much. The Senate's still up in the air, too. Tonight, there are a number of races still yet to be called, and that leaves both majorities in question. CBN News White House correspondent Abigail Robertson is at the White House with the night's top story.
The White House is reacting to Tuesday's results with glee and giddiness as Democratic House and Senate candidates performed far better than anticipated.
We did what we needed to do.
Democrats flipped a Senate seat in Pennsylvania with John Fetterman defeating Mehmet Oz. In other close Senate races, Republicans held on to Ohio, Wisconsin, and North Carolina, while Democrats kept New Hampshire, Colorado, and Washington state. Neither Nevada nor Arizona have been called yet.
We've got, as Stephen just mentioned, over, and we don't know the exact numbers, but over about 400,000 votes yet to be counted and reported.
With both the governor and Senate races up in the air, Arizona election officials say they will provide daily updates, although final results are likely days away.
We have anticipated that we would have 95 to 99% of all the ballots counted and reported by Friday.
The current count indicates a sizable number of Arizonans voted split parties on statewide races. That trend also seen in New Hampshire, which elected a Senate Democrat and Republican governor, and Georgia, where incumbent Governor Brian Kemp defeated Stacey Abrams, while the neck-and-neck Georgia Senate race is heading for a December runoff. But the story of the day...
Thank you for honoring us with a win for the ages.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis beating Democrat Charlie Crist by almost 20%. Exit polls indicated 45% of GOP voters there want DeSantis to lead the party in 2024, while just 33% chose former President Trump. Nationwide, however, dozens of candidates only won by razor-thin margins, leading neither party to feel like ringing the victory bell.
To me, it feels like America telling our political system that we're done trying to hate each other. We're exhausted from hating each other on a daily basis.
Christian author Carlos Whitaker shared this perspective on the results.
People like us that are ready to be curious about people that aren't like us, we're going to win in the end. Why? Because I feel like that's who we were created to be.
As results still trickle in, politicians are already preparing for 2024, with former President Trump teasing a major announcement for next week. If he decides to run, though, there's a growing possibility as new leaders of the party emerge, he'll face a strong challenge from within his own party. Reporting from the White House, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Abby. And even before the results started coming in last night, the former president made this prediction.
Well, I think if they win, I should get all the credit, and if they lose, I should not be blamed at all. When they do well, I won't be given any credit, and if they do badly, they will blame everything on me.
Later, the New York Times reported Trump was livid and screaming after GOP flops in the House and the Senate. The Times reporting Trump insiders are pushing Trump to reschedule a planned 2024 announcement next week. But as of now, all plans are still in motion. And here with us now is Rick Klein, political director for ABC News. Rick, welcome. It's good to see you after what was a very long and big night. So what does this all mean for Donald Trump in 2024?
Yeah, Jenna, I don't know how you look at this election and don't say that it was a terrible night for Donald Trump. he, across the board, many of his candidates fall short. Many of his candidates that he got over the finish line in the primary ended up being defeated or otherwise lagging in the vote total. I mean, just look at Georgia, where he tried and failed to defeat Governor Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp won easily, but his chosen candidate for Senate, Herschel Walker, is going to be in a runoff against the Democrat there, Raphael Warnock, in a state that Democrats always knew they would play defense on. So I think Trump walks away from this wounded politically. I think any honest reading of this election would show that he had a major impact on Republican chances, and almost certainly it would have been a bigger night if Donald Trump didn't have the kind of influence that he had.
Yeah, do you think it kind of opens the window for someone like Ron DeSantis, whose star is majorly rising after last night?
100%. As bad as Donald Trump's night was, that's how good it was for Ron DeSantis. Florida was a red sea. And what you saw up and down the ballot, Republicans doing very well, picking up a couple of House seats because of a redistricting map that Ron DeSantis helped pass into law, and parts of the state that have long been Democratic flipping to the Republicans. And it wasn't lost on many people that Ron DeSantis didn't associate himself with Donald Trump down the stretch. They had their own separate events. And in fact, it was probably Trump's choice to not invite DeSantis. We've seen him already brand him with a new nickname. Trump seems geared up for that fight, but DeSantis is kind of rising above that fray.
Yeah. Still so many races too close to call, Rick. What's your sense where things stand right now about the balance of power in Washington in the House and the Senate?
Republicans are probably going to be in control of the House when all the votes are counted, but it's not going to be nearly the kind of margin that they hope, not nearly the kind of midterm election that they had once had visions of. In the Senate, it's going to come down to a runoff in Georgia. At this point, I believe. I think the remaining races, if Nevada goes to the Republicans, Arizona to the Democrats, we're sitting there right on the precipice of a tied Senate. And that means that runoff a month from now, Herschel Walker versus Raphael Warnock, is going to be for control of the Senate. We've been there before. We saw it in 2020 with both of those Senate races determined at the same time. So we may have gotten some practice with it, but I feel like we could be headed to exactly a replay of that scenario.
Yeah, Groundhog's Day. Were you at all surprised, Rick, by John Fetterman's Senate win against Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania? There are reports that former President Trump was particularly mad over aides advising him to back Oz in that race.
Yeah, I mean, look, he can blame aides or he can blame his own instincts on that. He said Oz was a big TV star, and that's why he was with him. I think if Dave McCormick, to name one of the other candidates, was the candidate there, he probably would have had an easier time. You don't know how the campaign plays out. I think this was always going to be a top target for Democrats to try to take over a seat held by Republicans. Dr. Oz certainly brought celebrity and wealth to the race, but there was some baggage there, or not really being from the state most recently as a piece of it. And given all of that, given John Fetterman's own health, it still looked like Oz was in the mix to the end. But ultimately, more Pennsylvanians pulled the lever for the Democrat than the Republican.
So exit polls show last night 75% of voters say they don't like the way the country's headed. If you can kind of read the tea leaves for us, Rick, what does that mean for both parties? Is there a bit of a sense that voters across the country are casting ballots for normalcy?
I think there's probably something to that, Jenna. I think that there's a lot of frustration out there, and it's interesting because usually you look at those kind of numbers and you think, wow, the party in power is really in a bad place. How do you walk away from this with anything? But the fact that we're so divided means that there's lots of Republicans to blame as well. I do think that you saw ballots cast for centrists. I think I mentioned that split ticket effect in Georgia. Democrats had the similar thing go on for themselves in a range of states, including in Pennsylvania, where the Democratic candidate for governor won a lot more easily. In Wisconsin, where the Democrat won for governor and the Republican won for Senate, Ron Johnson. So I think people were splitting their tickets. Candidates matter, campaigns matter, and issues matter as well.
All right, Rick Klein with ABC News. Thank you so much, Rick. It's great to see you.
Thank you. Thanks. Good to see you, too.
Well, control of Congress wasn't the only high-stakes contest this election cycle. Voters also weighing in on abortion, rejecting pro-life measures on the ballots in states across the country. Voters in Michigan, California, and Vermont all affirming access to abortion, making abortion a right. Voters in Kentucky rejecting a pro-life measure that would have kept abortion rights out of the state's constitution. Still undecided, a Montana measure that would establish any infant born alive after an abortion as a legal person. All right, with that, we now want to bring in Marilyn Musgrave, Vice President of Government Affairs at Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America. Marilyn, welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Let's start with Montana and this measure that's there. Help us understand it. Why would an infant born alive need legal status?
Well, an infant that survives a botched abortion certainly leaves medical care. And so that's what this is all about. That little baby that survived the abortion, whether or not it will be offered medical care that any other baby under different circumstances would be given.
Oh, okay. What do these initial results tell you? Results across the country on abortion. What do they tell you about where voters stand and how they're feeling on the issue of abortion?
Well, first of all, the Dobbs decision was like an earthquake after 50 years, hit this country hard. And I think the Democrats were ready to seize the moment and get their narrative going, quite frankly, with lies most of the time. So they went after the pro-life Republican candidates. And quite frankly, many of those candidates weren't ready to respond. So they chose to stick their head in the sand and not answer. But we saw examples of candidates that were very much on offense that really revealed the extremism of the Democrat candidates. And I think that fared very well. So they had to show the extremism, abortion on demand up to the moment of birth. And some of our candidates did that very well, and they won their races. As far as these ballot initiatives go, the other side has all the money. And it's not like two candidates up there debating each other. It's like a ballot initiative backed by big money, promoting lies. And it's very difficult to withstand that kind of money and that kind of force in a ballot initiative.
In New Mexico, the city of Hobbs is adopting the first sanctuary city for the unborn. Marilyn, what does this mean for the pro-life movement?
Well, I think that when you think of sanctuary cities for the unborn, pro-life people around this country are trying to figure out how to deal with this extreme position from the other side. Again, no restrictions on abortion whatsoever. They're thinking of these moms and babies and trying to find a way to help save lives and help families.
So where does it go from here? You know, as we sort through these election results, we look at these different measures and how they did in different places across the country. For the pro-life movement and for all of you at Susan B. Anthony, where does your fight go next?
Well, first of all, let's point out governors that are very pro-life governors like DeSantis and Kemp and DeWine, you know, that have signed into law heartbeat or pain-capable bills fared very well. So I think the pro-life movement needs to be encouraged that when we go on the offense, when we really reveal where the other side is on this issue, the American people, the voters, see the extremism of the other side. And we're certainly going to see this play out as presidential candidates come forward. And I think there's going to be a strong message from pro-life Republicans. And I think that's going to fare very well for them in this next election cycle.
All right, Marilyn Musgrave with the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America. It's great to have you on the show this evening. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. And coming up, some are calling it a direct threat to our national security. The behind-the-scenes concern about TikTok. And welcome back. The FCC commissioner is urging TikTok banned, calling the app a direct threat to our national security. While the app has more than 200 million downloads in the U.S. alone, those users are likely being watched by communist China. Brody Carter reports.
The phenomenal growth of TikTok, owned by the Chinese company ByteDance, means its information infrastructure is collecting Americans' personal data at an alarming rate. Even simple information like your name, birthday, and location could be used for extortion.
China has a national security law that compels every entity within its jurisdiction to aid its espionage and what they view as their national security efforts.
FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr is back in the spotlight after a revamped push to ban TikTok. He cites national security concerns, including that China could use data collected here to potentially influence the country's political process, and even more.
And we see just a history of nefarious conduct, from business industrial espionage to blackmail. So there's a lot of reasons to be concerned.
Carr told Axios, quote, "There simply isn't a world in which you could come up with sufficient protection on the data that you could have sufficient confidence that it's not finding its way back into the hands of the Chinese Communist Party."
Now we know that they were planning to target specific Americans. It's now been banned on military devices, on government officials' devices, yet it's still available for the average American.
Jake Denton with Heritage Foundation says the Treasury Department first investigated TikTok in 2019. Afterward, then-President Donald Trump threatened to ban the platform in 2020 unless it was sold to a U.S. company. Today, the Foreign Investment Committee is working to determine whether TikTok can be divested from the Chinese company. Denton says American data could end up in Texas, but worries U.S. servers could still be accessible to Chinese engineers, risking Americans' data.
So ultimately, take the device from your child, remove TikTok, make sure this is not, on the devices of your family members, because the data collection is happening whether or not you want to acknowledge it. The only solution here is an outright ban of TikTok in the United States.
And I don't use TikTok for that reason, is because I know where it's going. It's going to the Chinese government.
Free speech advocate and creator of TuskBrowser.com, Jeff Berman, says TikTok surveillance tactics partly inspired him to create a web browser protecting users from bad actors, and warns the Chinese government's playbook could easily happen here in the U.S.
And that is very, very, very concerning. It's very clear in the Constitution the government shall not do anything like that, and they need to put more, better laws in place.
In September, TikTok executive Vanessa Pappas was questioned by the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. Senator Rob Portman expressed this worry.
I'm concerned that you're not able to answer the question except to say that you will not make the commitment to cutting off this data to China. We think that all data collected relating to Americans and then accessed in China is a problem. We think it should be safe from exploitation by the Chinese Communist Party.
Many political candidates are using TikTok, and there are signals the app could play a bigger role in future elections, which is a red flag to some national security and social media experts. Brody Carter, CBN News.
And when we come back, not so fast. How the UK is leading the way in reversing course on gender transitions for kids. Well, alarmed by a lack of research, England's National Health Service is taking the lead in changing the course of gender treatment for children. Its decision means sharply limiting a medical approach in favor of encouraging therapy. And just last week, Florida's medical board became the first in the country to ban that gender-affirming treatment. Heather Sells has more on what's fueling this growing movement.
In eliminating its gender clinic model, the British government plans to focus on counseling and therapy for children struggling with their gender. It also plans to severely limit puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones.
It's a seismic shift, really.
The fact that they have looked at the science, they were ahead of us in these procedures, and now they're taking the foot off the brake, I think that's huge.
The UK's new National Health Service guidance leans on findings from an independent medical review. It cites an explosion in gender identity cases from less than 300 10 years ago to more than 5,000 last year alone. Most are girls who identify as boys, like Chloe Cole here in the U.S.
I was only 12 years old when I told my parents that I was a boy. At 15, I went under the knife for a radical double mastectomy, the kind that breast cancer patients get.
At 16, Cole regretted her decision, and she's not alone, as the community of those who medicalized and are trying to switch back is growing. British researchers point out that most identity cases will naturally resolve themselves by adolescence. Perhaps most striking, the UK government is citing the lack of credible research on gender medicine.
Probably the most important thing is the UK is now recognizing that what in the U.S. we're called gender-affirming care is not based on solid science.
This conclusion follows similar shifts in Finland and Sweden, and new groups of doctors and therapists in the U.S. that are questioning what's called gender-affirming care. In addition to Florida, other states like Arkansas and Texas are moving to ban or limit these medical treatments for children. Fighting this trend are professional organizations like the American Association of Pediatrics, as well as President Biden, who says states should not limit medical treatment.
I don't think any state or anybody should have the right to do that.
as a moral question and as a legal question. I just think it's wrong.
A new study shows 300,000 U.S. teenagers identify as trans, and the number of medical treatments has spiked. From 2016 to 2019, surgeries increased by almost 400%. That includes more than 1,000 mastectomies. Still, some experts believe the tide could be turning. As medical concerns grow,
and I wish I could go back and have a redo button.
And more young people find they're not happy with what they've done.
I finally realized what happened to me, that I had made a huge mistake.
I do think that as the evidence mounts, as the other countries come forward with an opposite view, the American medical establishment is going to have to listen.
We're going to have a major slugfest in the American court system over the next couple of years.
Richards and others believe former patients and their families who regret their choices will fight back with massive class action lawsuits. One is already starting in the UK. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Go ahead, an update on where I've been and the company I've been keeping these past few months. Next. And finally tonight, you may recall a big announcement back in June welcoming a new member to the CBN News family. But for those who are wondering where I've been these past few months, I'm happy to introduce you to the newest member of my family, Grace Christine. She's now almost 5 months old. Grace is happy and healthy. She loves to smile and has such a sweet and sunny spirit. She loves people. Very alert from the moment she was born. She's about 2 months old there. And sleeping through the night. At about 8 weeks, she started sleeping through the night. So Joe and I, my husband, are thrilled about that. I just can't get enough of her. She's been such a joy, such a delight, and maternity leave is just wonderful. All that to say, it is wonderful to be back with all of you here and back in the news of the day. And I am so grateful for CBN News and for my coworkers here, and of course for all of you. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.